Good morning. So let's see. Today, I wanted to look at a particular koan, and as a way of kind of looking at the koan, I wanted to look back at the history and some of the teachings of the main character in the koan, because it gives insights to the koan. So let's go ahead and start with the koan. So Blue Cliff Record, and this is translated by Thomas Cleary, and he tends to use the Japanese names. So in this one, number 11, Gobblers of Dregs, he refers to Obaku, but I'll use the Chinese name most of the time, Huangpo. So I'll just do the, read the koan here. So Huangpo said to the crowd, "You are all gobblers of dregs. If you go on like this, where will you have today? Do you know that there are no Zen teachers in all of China?" Then a monk came forward and said, "Then what about those who follow orders and lead communities all over the place?" Huangpo said, "I don't say there's no Zen, there's just no teachers." So I've always loved this one. Now dregs, of course, got my attention. I am a brewer. So if you're making beer or wine, the dregs, that's the grain, that's what's left over after all the sugar has been pulled away. So it's nothing but husks. You can't even digest it. It's just leftovers. So Huangpo, he's most likely speaking to a community of practitioners, probably monks or nuns. And you're all gobblers of dregs. So they're reading their sutras, they're chanting their chants, they're doing their rituals, but you're gobbling dregs. There's nothing digestible there. So what is it getting at? What is it getting at? And that last piece, there's Zen. There's just no teachers of Zen. So I love the irony of just doing this one, particularly as I'm sitting here giving a talk. So Huangpo, probably my favorite history of Zen, and there's a few out there, but the Zen Experience by Thomas Hoover, I discovered this years ago, and I loved this particular book. And so just a little bit about Huangpo, just to try to give insights into this koan and what might it mean for us. So let's see. So Huangpo lived in the 800s, and he died in 850, which is just a little after this great persecution that happened around 845. So prior to that, there was a northern school and the southern school was in. A northern school was a difference of opinion about enlightenment, right? Sudden versus gradual. And at this time, the northern school was really the dominant school until this great persecution in around 845, where the Chinese government really cracked down on all these monasteries, and it kind of devastated northern Zen. And so the southern community, which was more rural, they became more prominent after that. But so he lived during this time. He wanted to study with Matsu. You might have heard of Matsu, but he had died. Matsu had died before Huangpo got to the monastery. So he studied with Po Cheng Huai He. Now I will just refer to him as teacher because my Chinese is not that good. And the only reason we know about Huangpo, this is a long time ago, is because he had one follower, Pei Sui, who happened to be a government dignitary, and he wrote down everything. He followed Huangpo. And in his writings, he said he followed Huangpo 24 hours a day, listening to everything that Huangpo had to say. Now, I don't know if that's true, but he was very diligent in writing this down. And so that's why we have a lot of his teachings today. So if you'd all like to get busy, you can write down everything Roshi says. A few thousand years from now, we'll know what you said. So let's see. So at this time, it really wasn't so much about sudden versus gradual enlightenment. This time, his interest, or his focus, I'll say, was really on one mind. His focus on teaching of one mind. And he was particularly interested in these questions. How does enlightenment fit into the mental world? And how are these intuitive insights transmitted to others? Right. So with his practice, it was very much a move beyond the conceptual mind, right? The ideas that we have. And you can hear this back in the Koan, right? You're gobblers of dregs. You're just bringing in knowledge. Right? For him, it was much more a focus on the intuitive nature of Zen and the practice. And what does that mean from an everyday mental perspective? And how do you give that to somebody else? Huang Po struggled with the fundamental dilemma of Zen, how the wordless wisdom of intuition can be passed from generation to generation. Enlightenment necessarily has to be intuitive, and that means traditional teaching methods are useless. There are no conceptual formulations or concepts. It is by definition, Zen is by definition wordless. So you can kind of see this back in this koan, right? Gobblers of dregs. Gobblers of dregs. They're not internalizing it, right? They're not digesting the teachings. They're repeating. So one mind. And the author here, I like the way that his biographer, Pei Shui, if I get that correct. How did the early Zen masters guide their followers? Hui Hai, his teacher, answered this very un-Zen-like question. So this was a teacher that Huang Po asked his teacher. How did the early Zen masters guide their students? So even as an early practitioner, an early monk, Huang Po was fascinated with this idea. And his teacher just kind of rebuked him, sit there in silence, said nothing. And then when Huang Po pressed the point, his teacher called him a disappointing disciple. Disappointment. Probably a few beatings. Back then, they liked to beat people too. So, not something we have in the modern day, fortunately. Yet. Give Roshi time. So this was the era that it was in. This was the focus of his practice. What is this intuitive understanding of Zen? And I wanted to look at some more. This is from his biographer. And again, it gives you insights into this koan. So just a little bit. In these days, people, this is from the biographer kind of giving us Huang Po's teachings. This is Huang Po. In these days, people only seek to stuff themselves with knowledge and deductions, seeking everywhere for book knowledge and calling this Dharma practice. They do not know that so much knowledge and deduction have just the contrary effect of piling up obstacles. Merely acquiring a lot of knowledge makes you like a child who gives themselves indigestion by gobbling too many curds. So you can see kind of a parallel back to the koan. Gobbling too many curds, right? So just eating too much and then getting sick. So interesting word choice, perhaps implying that maybe they would have been better off not eating at all. Or perhaps a little less, right? One mind, direct, personal, intimate insight. Intimate in the sense that it's not coming from a teacher, right? It's not coming from someone else. It's coming internally. And there's a story I like about Huang Po. It's hard to tell how much of this is true because this was so long ago, but I love the stories. So the story goes that he had a lump on his forehead because one of his practices was to do full prostration bows all the way to the ground, right? Head goes down, hands up, right? And then he did it so forcefully that over time he started to get this knot in his head because his head kept hitting the ground every time he would do his bow. And so a student asked him about his bowing practice. And so once while bowing, a student challenged him and asked, why was he always bowing since he didn't hold to religious traditions and practices, concepts? What did he hope to attain with his bowing? Now, you can already tell this is going to go bad. All right, what did the student asked Huang Po, what does he hope to attain with this bowing? And Huang Po slapped the student. And Huang Po said to him, you know nothing at all about Zen. There is nothing to attain. Bowing has nothing at all to do with traditions and religious practices. I just bow. I just bow. So when you sit, can you just sit? What does that even mean? That's a bit of a mental conundrum, right? Can you just sit? When we do the walking meditation, can you just walk? Right? When you're at work, when you're at family, when you're relaxing, when you're angry, can you just do this? Just this. So think about your practice. Do you have something in your practice where you can do just that? Wholeheartedly, body, mind, spirit, there, just this. For me, it tends to be the walking meditation. That's the thing where I focus on just step. Just step. So I'll challenge you, find something in your practice. Okay? Just this. And it can be a challenge, right? It's hard for us to do just anything because we're up here, right? Things are spinning. Usually when I'm walking, I'm somewhere else. A lot of times I'm thinking about the clapper. What time is it? Because a lot of times I'm leading it. That's always an interesting challenge. Or I'm at home doing something else, or I'm at work doing something else. And I catch myself, I'll bring myself, just this, just step. So it's a challenge. Even for me, I'm sure Roshi has that challenge. Everybody has that challenge, but find that practice. Ideally, something you can do every day where it's just this. Wholeheartedly immerse yourself. And then imagine extending that to the rest of your life. Just this, just this. So a little more from Huang Po. Those who study the way, according to the three vehicles, those are the three schools of Buddhism, are all like this. All you can call them is people who suffer from indigestion. When so-called knowledge and deductions are not digested, they become poisons, obstacles. For they belong only to the plane of samsara, the plane of suffering. So in the absolute, there is nothing at all of this kind. So digested, that's a key word he's using here. It's not that we shouldn't bring these things into us, but you have to internalize it. You have to work with it. You have to digest it. Which I like, again, back to the Koan. He's telling you, you're ingesting dregs. There's nothing here. Now he's probably speaking to advanced students telling them to move beyond the teaching, move beyond the ritual, right? But we all bring things in, but we need to digest them, right? It's not enough just to hear it. It's not enough to treat Zen as a philosophy. An example, Four Noble Truths, right? The truth that life contains the seed of suffering. The next truth, the truth that suffering is caused by attachment. The truth that we can end suffering by letting go of attachment. And then the truth of the Eightfold Path, which is a path for alleviating suffering. If not digested, I'll suggest to you that that can be a poison. If you really don't digest that, that is a recipe for spiritual bypassing. Just let go. Just detach, separate from the world, not engaging. Right? You have to digest it. What does this mean personally? How do I work with my attachments? What does skillful means? How do you work with it? And everything's like this. Go to a self-help book, go to therapy, whatever it is, whatever works for you, you have to digest it, internalize it from within. What does this mean for me? And then how do I transcend past that? How do I move past that? How do I not get stuck on that? There's the second part to digestion, right? It has to pass through, not to be crude. But don't get stuck there. Don't get stuck there. So a little more. All the concepts you have formed in the past must be discarded and replaced by void. The canonical teachings of the three vehicles are just remedies for temporary needs. They were taught to meet such needs, and so are of temporary value and differ from one another. If only this could be understood, there would be no more doubts about it. So the teachings, right, from his perspective here on one mind, they are remedies. They are things that get you started. Right? We learn our notes, we learn our scales, and then eventually you improvise, become that jazz musician. The Groshis use that one from time to time. I like that in this context here. So the forms, the ritual, the history, the books, they're all aids that you must digest. You must work with it and then set these aside. They're temporary. What are you bringing? We all bring something. We talk a lot about all the negative things that we bring. But what about the positive things we bring? A scientist. I had to let go of rigorous deduction as part of my practice. Not to eliminate it, but those built up very specific concepts that I had to let go as I began to work with this. Like, what is this as I sit on the cushion or as I'm walking? You have to be careful. Others come from more of a history background or therapists. It's very easy to get caught in the models of therapy, behavioral models, or to want to diagnose, all very valuable. But when you practice, are those obstacles? Is your practice now caught up in those models? How do you move beyond? How do you digest? And then last one from Huangpo. Above all, it is essential not to select some particular teaching suited to a certain occasion and to be impressed by the fact that it's written in the canon, written into the sutras. Don't regard this as an immutable concept. Why so? Because in truth, there is no unalterable Dharma which the Buddha could have preached. There is no unalterable Dharma which the Buddha could have preached. Challenge everything. I think that was one of the things that drew me to this practice. Challenge everything. The Buddha was imperfect. Dalai Lama is imperfect. Surprise, Dave is imperfect. And how do you use the Dharma? How do you intimately use the Dharma? There's a story for Maizumi. Maizumi Roshi is one of the main teachers in our lineage. And it really touched upon this. There was this woman who was a professional dancer. It's a dancer story. Ginger will love stories about dancers. She had injured her foot, actually was hit by a subway. And because of that, could no longer dance, and went to a retreat given by Maizumi. And as part of that, they go into one-on-one interviews with the teacher. And she goes in for this interview with Maizumi, and she starts to talk about her practice. And Maizumi says, "Never mind about that. Tell me about your foot." And she begins to tell the story. And as she's telling the story, because there's a grief there, I think, and tears are coming down her face. And as she nears the end of the story, she looks up at Maizumi as tears coming down his face. And they repeat this day after day for about a week. She tells the story about her foot and tears coming down her face. Maizumi, tears. And then the last day, she comes into the interview and begins to tell about her foot, but no tears have come. And Maizumi says, "Never mind about that. Tell me about your practice." Intimately connected to the Dharma in that moment. Never mind some practice, never mind walking meditation, never mind sitting. What's going on right now? What's intimately going on? And so I love that story. It's very reminiscent of what Huang Po is getting at. Don't hold on to specifics of the practice. What is this? What is this moment? So we'll come back to the calling now. I've lost it, of course. So now that you know a little more about Huang Po, Huang Po said to this crowd of monks, "You are all gobblers of dregs. If you go on like this, what will you have today? Do you know that there are no Zen teachers in China?" I don't say that there's no Zen, just that there are no teachers. So we're all gobblers of dregs, right? Bringing things in. And we can't help it. This is how we are. So we can't deny that this is who we are. But to know this, we're bringing things in. Now, is that an obstacle? Right? Is that an obstacle? And I love the irony of the fact that I used 3 different books to come up with this talk. Right? So I've used all kinds of concepts. So Roshi will beat me with the stick later in this. So, but how do you work with it? Because there are very few things that I can guarantee. I guarantee that you are stuck on something. I am stuck. The Buddha was stuck. Dalai Lama is stuck. Everybody is stuck on, we're all gobbling our dregs. We're stuck. So how do you work with it? Are you willing to walk this path that Huang Po was talking about, examining all of those things, working with those, digesting this, and then seeing what's next, seeing what's next. I don't say that there is no Zen, there are just no teachers. You're not going to get it from someone else. They can point the way, right? Give you a little nudge, but in the end, you have to work with it. So I'll leave you with that. It's about a good time. Thank you.